Well, welcome to Runners World's Inside Track with Dr. Russ Tuck and myself, Mike Finch. We're going to be, as you heard earlier this week, throughout the World Championships, we're going to be bringing you some of the highlights and the talking points around the World Championships. We're going to be live on a video cast on Facebook Live, but also you can download the podcast on the Runners World site as well, and we'll send you the link a bit later around that. So lots to talk about, a lot of excitement going into the World Championships tonight. Ross, you've sent me a long list of things we need to talk about. We're going to try to do this in half an hour, but there are so many stories. But let's start off with something that's been a bit controversial this week that has not only just a local South African angle to it, but has a global perspective as well. Louisa Laballo, one of our road runners and marathon runners, caught for drugs, well, not drugs, basically for a banned substance, EPO, given an 8-year sentence, not only because she was caught with the EPO in her system, but also she tried to bribe an official, so didn't really do very well there. But let's just talk a little bit about the kind of stimulants and banned substances that athletes use. So the endurance guys are using EPO. What is EPO? How does it benefit them?
Well, first of all, when we did this preview show on Tuesday, we said we couldn't get through these championships without talking about doping. We haven't even made the start line.
It's the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, and that's not even the only doping story, because last night there were a couple of other things came out around London. So this is going to be an unavoidable theme. But to answer your question, EPO is a hormone which your body produces, everyone's does, and it is responsible for stimulating the body to make more red blood cells.
Okay.
So when endurance athletes, so now we're talking about long distance runners like marathon, 10,000, but actually all the way down, even 400 meter sprinters will get some benefit. One of the big limitations they face is how much oxygen they can get to the muscles, because that oxygen is needed at the muscles in order to help produce energy. And so you can think of it as a traffic jam where there's insufficient transport for the oxygen, and what EPO does is effectively puts more cars on the road.
Okay.
And so it's a hormone then that will trigger the formation of more red blood cells, and the result is more oxygen carrying capacity and hence better performance. And so EPO was developed in the late 1980s as a drug to help people who were experiencing renal failure. So it had medical purposes, but very quickly athletes recognized this is the same thing we face, is the same problem of insufficient blood cells, oxygen. And so it became widely used in the sport, and it's blamed, or the increase in speeds of the Tour de France, for instance, in the 1990s, are blamed on EPO use in the peloton. Lance Armstrong is perhaps the most famous athlete who's admitted to using EPO, but if you go back and you look up drug positives and not drug busts, but athletes who failed doping controls, EPO is the most famous of those on the endurance side. The alternative to EPO, by the way, is you take the blood out when you don't need it, and then you put it back in when you do. So that's called blood doping, and it preceded EPO. So before this miracle EPO drug was invented, that's what they used to do for the same.
When you say they take the blood out, what the blood that's been basically made when you're at high altitude, for instance, and you put it back into the body when you're at low altitude?
Anytime when you're not competing. So if you know that you've got a big event coming up in 3 or 4 weeks' time, then you take the blood out then. Your body's response to losing blood is to make more, so you get back to normal. So you go from here to here when you take it out. Physiology kicks in, you go back to normal, and then the night or 2 nights before you need it for the event, you put it back in, and now you're above normal. So that's what you've ended up doing.
Okay.
But obviously there's a downside, because you've got to take it out and then put it back, and you lose the capacity to do hard training and so forth in that time. So EPO solved that problem, but the principle was the same, is how do I get more blood?
I mean, there were stories back in the Tour de France days where guys used to have, because of blood doping and EPO, their blood would get very thick. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's the downside, because now you're adding blood cells to liquid, and you can imagine adding more solids into liquid is getting pastier and pastier, like a syrup eventually.
Is it true they used to get up in the middle of the night and do exercises just because their heart rates the blood pressure would drop?
That's the story. I don't know whether some people have said to me that was an urban legend, but I've heard the same thing, is they would have to wake up in the morning and spend 5 minutes sitting on a bicycle in the rollers just to get
Stop
that
from
little
dying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, scary stuff, eh?
Yeah.
So, as you said, it's unavoidable that we have to talk about these sort of things. But I don't want to talk about this too much, because we want to focus on the positives of these World Championships. But the EPO is the stuff that the guys take if they're doing endurance events, as you've explained. The explosive athletes, what are they on? What sort of stuff do they need to go faster?
So testosterone's the most famous one. Well, testosterone plus any number of synthetic versions of the same thing. So if Armstrong is the poster boy for EPO, thanks to the busts of, what was it, Oprah Winfrey's couch a few years ago, the poster guy for steroid use was Ben Johnson in 1988. And he was using a synthetic version of an anabolic steroid. So anabolic means to build up. And so basically what these drugs do is they increase muscle mass. If you have to train on them, right? It's not like you can take this thing before you go to bed every night and wake up the next morning looking like Ben Johnson did. So there's obviously work you've got to do on the drug. But the end result is increased muscle mass, and that means strength and power and consequently speed, right? So the anabolic steroids were widely abused in the 1980s. In fact, before that, synthetic steroids were developed in the 1960s, primarily in East Germany. And one of the reasons that you hardly ever see women's world records in the sprint and power events is because in the 1970s and 80s, those drugs were so powerful that they took women's performances from this point to this point, and 30 years of knowledge and science and training and development haven't yet managed to overcome that advantage. So they're enormously powerful for that reason. The point that I would want to make for everyone listening is that these drugs obviously do have some acute effect, but the biggest benefit of doping is the fact that it allows you to recover so quickly. So you can go out and do 2 training sessions a day every single day. And that's true of EPO, it's true of testosterone, it's true of some of the others that they might use, growth hormone as an example. They are there to allow you to recover from one day to the next so that you can do 10% more work. So this idea that dopers don't train actually is completely incorrect. The point of doping is to train harder.
And recover quicker.
And so that's what everyone's looking for. So that's why sprinters use EPO as well. There have been cases where they'll catch guys using testosterone, growth hormone, and EPO. So everyone's using it for the same reason, and it's recovery, which has important implications because the athlete doesn't have to take the drug. So for instance, we'll talk tomorrow about men's 100-meter final tomorrow night. Those athletes don't need to dope today. The doping's been done because the doping was effective when they were training because it allowed them to recover and train harder. So when you test them in London, they don't need to be doping in order to be dopers. And that's one of the challenges, is that you don't detect it because
you have to be there when they're training.
Exactly, and that's what's difficult.
So. There was a suggestion earlier this year, and I'm actually not sure what ever came of it, but the IAAF were looking at banning or actually scattering all previous world records, I think prior to 2000, I think it was?
2006.
2006, yeah. And then basically starting again, and there was a lot of discussion about that. What are your thoughts on that?
So why 2006? Well, I've already alluded to part of the problem we've got in the sport is that some of those world records have no credibility, especially on the women's side. You go on Wikipedia and you look at women's world records and the dates, and you'll see 1987, 88, 88, 89. No one has come close to these performances in 30 years because, as I said, steroids gave those women such a big advantage that nothing is going to overcome it. And so what the authorities discussed is to go back to 2006. So why 2006? Is because in 2006 they introduced a new anti-doping tool called the biological passport. And in theory, there's more confidence in the passport than there was in the previous model, which was we spoke in the preview about the smoking gun idea, that you have to find the drug in the person's blood or urine. The passport means you don't. You now look for the effect, right?
So just explain briefly what the passport is.
So, I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, you take EPO for what reason? Increasing blood cell mass. And the same with blood doping. In the past, you had to find EPO. Now, you're looking for red blood cell mass. So in other words, instead of finding the source, you look at the outcome.
So somebody suddenly goes from having a blood cell mass of X, and suddenly it's massively higher. It's indicative of...
Because every day in human biology, there's normal variation. So you and I sit here today with short hair. If we showed up on tomorrow's podcast and we both had shoulder-length hair, viewers would say these guys are wearing a wig, because we understand that there's normal day-to-day variation. And you don't go from one extreme to the next like this. So as long as you can test athletes frequently, that's the key. Is you can't test the guy once a year. You've got to test him multiple times. You start to look for that variation. And if that variation from one day to the next exceeds a certain amount, then that's an indication that it had to have been done through illegal means. So that's the passport, and theoretically it's a much more powerful tool. There are some governance issues and credibility things that make me believe that the tool might be good. It's not perfect, I don't want to state that, but the tool's certainly better, but I don't know that it's been used as well as it might be. But the point was that because that came in 2006, the authorities are saying that from that point onwards, performances are more credible. Is that true or not? Maybe a little bit, but not. They're certainly not Snow White compared to Super Dodgy. So that's the debate. And
it's kind of sad for the athletes that did records. I mean, Paula Radcliffe, obviously her record would go in the marathon, and
that's
she's already crying foul about that anyway.
Yeah, so she was the most outspoken critic against it.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to believe that any distance record could have been set prior to the biological passport without doping.
Okay.
Yeah, because like in cycling, and you and I both have a cycling background. A lot of listeners will follow that sport also, but maybe you don't. So apologies for the cross reference. But in cycling, we know how pervasive EPO use was.
Yeah.
Until it might still be, but it's changed the way they use it. Why would it be in one sport and not another, where the benefit's the same? So, in the absence of testing, there was no limit to how much you could use it, EPO, in training. So I would be very skeptical of performances that were set prior to 2006. I'm still somewhat skeptical now about them but that's not a tool-related issue. When I started my scientific studies, it used to always be said that the science was always 2 steps behind the dopers. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think maybe we're sometimes half a step behind, but that gap's definitely smaller. The tools are better. For me, the biggest anti-doping failure is the will in the system, the desire. Do they actually want to catch the dopers? And so Louisa Lobalo is an example of actually where they got one. But who knows Louisa Lobalo? We do in South Africa. But how many big names get done?
I guess if you catch the big names, you essentially lose one of your marketing tools for the sport.
Exactly.
There's a business element to that. Yeah.
So and this is it's frustrating because we cannot go through these world champs without this shadow constantly being there. And you don't want to be in a situation where every single medalist, you have to say, that's probably doping.
No, for sure. Yeah.
So we kind
of
move
try
forward.
not to do that.
No, that's the point I want to make is that it's not cognitive dissonance on our part to say, let's now talk about some of the events. And we're not going to keep coming back to this. But I'm also not going to pretend that there's not this shadow over the whole thing. Now we must just move forward and hope that they catch guys.
Well, if you're listening to us live on Facebook, just send us some questions if you've got any comments to make, whether you disagree or agree with us. We're always very keen to hear your thoughts, and if you're involved in the World Championships, if you're watching from overseas, please let us know as well. We really do welcome interaction. Let's talk about, first of all, this weekend's events, and then more specifically what's happening tonight. Obviously, the big stories this weekend, we've got the men's 100-metre final tomorrow night. We've got Caster Semenya going for a double in the 1500 and 800 throughout these championships. He starts heats tonight, final on Monday. Let's start with Caster first. Dominant in the 800 metres, now going for this 1500, 800 metre double. People are saying she cannot win the 1500 metres. Those athletes are too good for her. Your thoughts?
Oh, it's going to be very difficult. The thing about her in the 15 is that she hardly ever does it. So she did it in 2016. So last year, just before the Olympics, she won the African Championships in Durban in 4:02, which is quick. But it's nowhere near the level of the top women in the world. There are 4 women in the world who are comfortably under 4. 3:56 is the world leader this year. The world record's 3:50. That athlete's also in the race, although I don't think she's at that level. But the point is that there is a group of athletes who are considerably faster than Semenya on paper.
Okay.
Where I think it's intriguing, and I would make Semenya a real outside shot for a medal, let alone gold. But what's really interesting is that tactically, if they run that 1500 final slowly, then Semenya is there with 500 to go. No one's beating her in a slow race. So there's a real responsibility on those 4 athletes who are the fastest. So that would be Dibaba's the world record holder, Kipyegon is the Olympic champion, and Hassan is the current world leader this year. Those three athletes, they're not getting together before the race and saying, ladies, like, we got Semenya in this race, we better go out fast, because if we let this woman hang on us for 1,200 meters, we're toast. They're not doing that.
No,
so it's everyone for
not a team
themselves.
sport
Exactly.
yet.
So it's everyone for themselves. So someone of those three has to take the responsibility to say, we're going to run this race at 3:57, 3:58 pace, so that we can specifically hurt Semenya.
Responsibility and risk.
That's the problem, because those three are so close together that whoever goes out and runs the first 2.5, 3 laps at 3:56 pace is basically just setting a pace for the others, and they will lose it. So that's what's really interesting, because that was, for me, that was going to be the most intriguing race of the championships, because those three, plus, by the way, there's a fourth, Laura Muir, who's had a few injury issues this year, so I didn't mention her before, but she's beaten all those athletes before. She beat the Olympic champion last year in the fastest time of the world in the world last year.
Yeah.
So she's there in front of a home crowd. So actually, there's 4 big names, and they've got to sort out how do they go tactically to deal with the threat of Semenya is comfortably the fastest over 400, fastest over 800. So it was already going to be a humdinger. It's the most interesting race for me, and I would make Semenya as I say, an outside shot, but I wouldn't rule her out because of that tactical nuance in the final. But that's Monday's problem, obviously. For now, it's how do you qualify? How do you get through the heats? It's tough. You run tonight, you run tomorrow night, you get 1 day off, and then you do the final. So that's a test of fitness, and that might be where Semenya comes short.
I guess that having been in a couple of World Championships and watched it from the media side, the key to these events is making sure that you just do enough to get through every single heat, and then make sure you get a decent lane draw. If you're in events like the 800 and the 400, you need a decent lane. Although Wade van Niekerk proves that you don't, but you want a decent lane. So the preliminary heats, I imagine Semenya tonight will just want to kind of cruise through and make sure that she's maybe in the top 2 even. She might not even win a heat tonight.
Yeah, so
will,
that often happens. She doesn't need to, right? So they have defined qualifying criteria. I think in the women's 15 it's top 5, plus then the 2 fastest losers from all 3 heats. So in order to be guaranteed, all you have to be is top 5. So what the big favourites do is they sort it out so that with 100 to go, they know if there's 7 athletes in this group, then I'm winning this. If they've already separated that there's 5, then you could walk over the line, and it makes no difference. No one remembers your 5th place in the heat.
So if Casa Semenya doesn't look very impressive tonight, it's because she knows that there's a long-term goal here.
Yeah, and that's the same for the men's 100. We'll see those qualifiers tonight. Okay, it's a little more difficult to manage and pace a 100, but they do. And the name of the game is spend as little energy as possible to get through.
Well, talking about men's 100, obviously that's one of the big stories of the games. Usain Bolt, without doubt the greatest sprinter the world has ever seen. His final games, he's not running the 200, and we talked about that on Tuesday, mainly because he's probably scared of Wade van Niekerk. That's what us South Africans think. But probably hasn't been in the worst shape, as you were saying on Tuesday, probably in the worst shape he's been at going into an event of World Championship and Olympic level.
By time, 995 is Bolt's best this year. That's a lot slower than he's been coming into a major championship since 2008. So he'll say, well, there have been injury issues, and he hasn't raced as much as he perhaps normally would have done. He's struggled with hamstring and lower back things. So we will see. I mean, he's always in the past come into World Champs and then improved by a 1/10 of a second. So that would suggest he can run 985. If he does that, it's difficult to see anyone else beating him. At the moment, though, there are 5 or 6 guys all clustered around 994 to 999, so it's extremely open on paper. But I think that if Bolt can find the usual improvement in the major championships, then he wins it again. So that'll be interesting to see who looks the smoothest in the final. So the first thing you'll see tonight...
Or the smoothest in the heats.
Sorry, not the finals, in the heats. That's what I mean to say. The first thing you'll see tonight is the qualifiers, the preliminaries. None of the big names do those. And then later this evening, towards the back of tonight's program, you see round 1. And that's where Bolt and Gatland and Blake and Simbine from South Africa and so on will race. Those are straight up races. and then I think I wrote down the qualifying standards. I think you have to be top 3 to make it through automatically to the semi-finals. Is that right?
Yeah, preliminaries. Top
yeah,
3
top
from
3
each,
from each, and then the 2 fastest losers in the whole round go through. That's from the preliminaries, and then they'll sort out the qualification for the semi-finals tonight. So the key there is don't mess up the start. So everyone will be conservative.
Yeah.
So you're not going to see 9.8s.
Yeah.
Tonight.
I mean, is Bolt still in your mind the clear favourite, or is Gatlin marginally the favourite? I think there's a lot of hype around Bolt, but on paper, that hype may be a little bit unjustified, just because it's his last major event.
I'd say he's less of a favourite now than he has been at most of the previous championships. In 2015 he came into World Champs, and Gatland had been running 9.7s all year, and was really the favourite on times. And whether he choked or tied up, or he just was poor in the final, and Bolt beat him. So maybe that was a situation where Bolt was not the favourite, but I would make Bolt the narrow favourite this time. The withdrawal of the Canadian De Grasse opens it up a little bit, because he's the young guy. Gatland and Bolt are really at the end of their career. De Grasse is one of those at the beginning, and the trajectory suggested that he might now be the one to leapfrog them. He's now not there.
Yeah.
So I would
hamstring, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd say Bolt, Gatland, not Gatland, the coach of the Lions, Justin Gatlin, and then there's a group of the next Jamaicans, Blake, the next Americans, Coleman and Christopher Belcher. Simbine is in that group. Uja from England. That's the group fighting for that other medal, I reckon.
So obviously, from a South African perspective, we're looking at Simbine to maybe get on the podium.
Yeah,
should be an amazing achievement.
5th in Rio. Everyone from Rio is there except De Grasse, so that's 4th.
Yeah.
So he's looking at it.
Yeah.
So.
That could be a good day.
We'll see.
One very interesting thing that came out recently was some research done around Bolt's stride, and they talked about the fact that he in fact was not very balanced. He had one side that was displaying a lot more force. There's a lot of talk about the kind of sprinters. I remember back in the day, Carl Lewis and Donovan Bailey were those kind of guys that when they did the research, they used to reach a very high top speed. They were literally very, very fast, but they didn't necessarily have the best starts. And you had the guys like Dennis Mitchell and those kind of guys who were really quick out the blocks. They could get out the blocks quicker. So there's a difference between raw, blatant speed and somebody who gets out the blocks really quickly. Now, Bolt is known for not being good out the blocks because he's a big, tall man, but obviously he has a very high speed. Talk a little bit about the dynamics of speed versus power in 100 meters.
Yeah, so the 100 is a maximum effort, but there's still a pacing strategy. It might not be conscious, but it's still there. And so sprinters are all slowing down in the last 30 meters of the race. Without exception. No one is reaching top speed and then maintaining it to the finish line. So what happens is, obviously, you're in the blocks, you accelerate really, really quickly. You hit top speeds, and this is most sprinters are hitting top speeds between 50 and 60 meters. Bolt accelerates for longer, so his top speed is reached at about 70 meters. So that's one of the first differences. And part of that might be his height, because once he is into his running and moving freely, then he's able to just accelerate a lot longer than other athletes. So because he accelerates longer, his top speed is higher. So when he ran the world record in Berlin in 2009, his top speed was around 44 kilometers an hour, which I believe is the highest that's ever been measured. The other guys in that race were running historically fast also, and they were at 42, 43. So it's not a big difference, but it's enough, right?
Yeah, it's enough.
It's in fact,
second.
It is a big difference.
Yeah.
When you look at that race, you YouTube that race from 2009, you'll see that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So Bolt hits top speed at sort of 70 meters, and it's a higher top speed than anyone else because he accelerates for longer. So
but he's catching up. He's having to catch up, isn't
right, so when you watch these races, and you would have seen it in 2011, 2013, not 2011, that's the false starter, 2013, 2015, 2016, and you'll see it again in this weekend, is Bolt will not be leading the race at 50 meters. In 2009, when he won that title in Berlin with a world record, he was actually second fastest reaction and second fastest to 20 meters.
Sure.
Which was the difference, because for a guy at the height of Bolt to be that quick over 20 meters is unheard of.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the top speed, and that's why that world record was broken, because he was just perfect from start to finish. He's lost that explosiveness at the start a little bit, and so he will not be leading at 40, 50 meters. But if he's within arm's reach of Gatlin or Blake or whoever it is, he's winning the race.
Because Blake's the quickest. Him and Gatlin, a bit of a toss-up, but Blake's short.
Yeah.
Gets out the blocks really quick.
Starting-wise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
starting-wise.
Right, so that's the thing to look for, is where's Bolt halfway through the race, because he's not going to be leading it. If he's leading it, you can go make your tea, because it's gonna end one way.
Yeah.
If
Watch the celebrations afterwards.
Yeah, if he's able to put his hand out and tap Gatlin on the shoulder and say, "Hey, buddy, I'm here again," he's still winning that race.
Yeah.
So the other guys need 1.5, 2 meters, I reckon.
Sure. Okay.
At halfway.
Yeah.
Because Bolt's catching them
Yeah.
in the latter half because of that longer acceleration and higher top speed.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, there's no doubt watching that. You know, I think we're very privileged to be in a stage of athletics where we be able to witness this kind of athletic performance from Bolt, because it is, you know, you can look at times, you can look at stats, you can look at science, but just watching him, you know, I think there's two great sides: watching Bolt flat out and watching Wade van Niekerk over the last 100 meters over 400 meters.
Yeah.
There's a stride, there's a beauty, there's a flow about it that is just, you know, you can't describe it. It is a beautiful thing. It's like watching 3,000 meters Kenyan steeplechasers.
Yeah,
you know, there's something poetic about it.
Yeah, when he's retired, it's the sport. Sebastian Coe acknowledged this the other day. He said that, you know, athletics needs to prepare. It's not just the other day. They've known this for a while. The sport needs to prepare for life after Bolt, because so many fans are drawn to his performances alone, and that's not a healthy situation for the sport to be in. You know.
For sure.
So Sebastian Coe said Bolt has done. I forget exactly what his words were, but he called Bolt a genius, which is weird.
He's a good runner, but he's not a genius.
Yeah, exactly. So we've changed the definition of genius now. And then he also said that Bolt has done more for the sport than... But you see, he hasn't really, because when Bolt leaves, the sport's going to be no better off than it was before he took over.
Although, in his defence, he has really done a great job in promoting Wade van Niekerk as the next big thing.
Well,
you know, he's
yeah.
really trying to help kind of continue the super athlete, the super celebrity athlete, isn't he? He's trying.
Yeah, well,
in his own way.
everyone's trying, because they have to, you know. But that's, for me, it highlights as a problem there, because they're heavily reliant on these guys. But then when they have these guys, they hardly ever race. I mean, Bolt and Gatlin have spent the last 6 years avoiding each other, except for major championships, and you see that a lot. De Grasse and Bolt have fallen out over that very accusation. Bolt was racing in Monaco, and De Grasse's coach said that he'd been excluded from that race because Bolt didn't want to compete against him. And so, in actual fact, all the stupid games they play undermines potentially their own effectiveness. You know, the sport needs rivalries. Like, you don't see Nadal and Federer and Djokovic avoiding each other.
No.
And the tennis is healthy because of the head-to-head.
Head-to-heads, yeah.
And so, so Bolt leaves the sport where? I don't know.
Well, I was trying to find a new Bolt, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know we can't talk about every single event over this weekend, and we'll get more into it tomorrow and on Sunday as we see the events fold out. But let's talk about one of the finals tonight, the men's 10,000 metres. It is, again, fascinating. It's controversial as well with Mo Farah. Talk us through it. What are we looking at in terms of the 10,000 tonight?
Yeah, so Farah, 2011 in the men's 10,000, Farah was beaten by an Ethiopian, Jaylan, on the final lap. Since that moment, he's not been beaten again in a major final. So we're talking 5,000. He did the double in London. He did the double in 2013. Did the double in 2015. Double in Rio. So he's now won. He'll be going for his 5th consecutive double at major championships, and that's never been done before. Historically, it's been difficult to do because they've had heats for both the 10 and the 5 and a semi-final. So the schedule is easier now than it used to be. But the big question, I suppose, it's Farah's last championships. So it's the final opportunity for the East Africans to get one over him.
He's 34 now, so he's ancient.
By distance running terms, he is, yeah. So I was reading on Let's Run's preview that in 2012, when he won the London title, he was the oldest guy in 32 years.
Okay.
And that was when he was 29. So now he's 5 years on from that. So
What makes him good? I mean, what makes him such a dominant?
Well, in these
distance athletes.
in these championship races, it's finishing speed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no one has yet found, since Jaylan beat him. So when Jaylan beat him in 2011, he ran the last lap in 52.8, and Farah was 53.3. And ever since then, Farah's closing in about 53.5 to 54 seconds in a 10,000, and no one's been able to replicate that. So the key for the East Africans, and as I say, it's their last chance to do it, is how do you eliminate that finishing kick? And I've watched Farah win these medals, over 10 especially, and been tearing my hair out because initially they were just so passive. They didn't do anything. It's kind of like we're going to jog for 23 laps.
And go for second.
Well, it looked like it.
Yeah.
It's 25 laps, right, the 10K. So it was like they were jogging around, well, I say jogging, they're running around for 23 laps. And then Farah's got this method of controlling the race. He'll go to the front with 600 or so to go, and anyone who tries to come past him, he just speeds up. He just speeds up. Because he's the guy who can handle that increase and that progressive ramping up of pace. And with the last 200 meters, he's going full out, full gas, and no one else is hanging. So what it takes, what it will take, is for someone to mess up Farah's ideal race. And that means someone's got to go early, and they've got to make the pace really aggressive. That maybe they've got to go fast, slow in the middle. But up to now, no one's had the ability or the desire to do that. So this year, there's 3 good Kenyans. Jeffrey Kamworor was the double world cross-country champ and a half marathon champion. And that half marathon title was won in Cardiff, and he was actually tripped up at the start line, and a few people ran over him, and he picked himself up, having lost, I don't know, 15 seconds. He caught up to the lead group, and he just kept going. And he absolutely destroyed Farah in that race. I think Farah ended up 3rd, but he was just obliterated. And that's the kind of aggression that's going to be required. You have to go hard.
Do you think the Kenyans, I mean, there's always talk about the Kenyans, particularly in steeplechase, working as a team. Do you think they'll do that here? There is that sort of Kenyan gees, for want of a better word, spirit, where they really do kind of almost sacrifice themselves to ensure at least one of the Kenyans wins.
They'll need one of their 3. So there's 3 of them. It's Kamworor, Beden Kuroki has been second to Jeffrey Kamworor every time they've run, basically. World Cross, World Half Marathon, Kenyan Trials. So he's their second guy. And then their third guy is Paul Tanui, who was the Olympic silver medalist. So he came closest to Farah in Rio. The problem, again, it's the same scenario as the women's 15, is which of those 3 is willing to sacrifice their gold medal ambitions for the sake of... And okay, this time they're on the same team, so it's a little bit different. But of the 3, I think Kuroki might be the likeliest. But they need someone... Fine, let it settle over 2K. But they need someone from about 3 kilometers to 7Ks to be really aggressive. And there's a guy in the race from Uganda called Joshua Cheptegei. If any of you watched the World Cross Country Champs earlier this year, it was in Uganda. And I think
that's right. It was a fantastic event.
It was brilliant. And I think maybe inspired by local crowd support, Cheptegei was super aggressive. And so I think with 3K to go, he attacks. And I mean, he attacked viciously, and he built up a big lead. And he was putting guys like Kamworor behind him big time. But then it was a hot day, and eventually he paid for it spectacularly. He melted badly, and so over the last 800 meters he fell off so dramatically. By the time he finished, he was staggering around the finish line like a drunk guy. I think he'd overheated. The point I'm trying to make is that he's the kind of athlete the Kenyans need, because he's aggressive enough and he's fearless enough to say, like, with 4Ks to go, like, let's do it.
He's got big kahunas.
And that's what I think has been lacking. So the Kenyans might benefit from that, because they need, as I say, someone has got to do something to mess up Farah's... Farah does this and then that. And someone's got to change that pattern.
So when you're watching the 10,000 tonight, I'm sure a lot of you will be, it is a fascinating event, because you often think, okay, these guys are going to go around in circles for 25 laps and then somebody's going to sprint to the finish. But there is so much more to watch. Watch out for the Kenyans, watch out for the Ugandan runner, just trying to set that pace. There's so much stuff going on there. That we've heard the track is quite hard and fast. Do you think that's going to have an effect on those 10,000 metre runners? It's a lot of time on a hard track. Do you think it's actually going to make them pay to some extent if they go out hard early on? Or
yeah, probably, but you don't see that in the race.
No.
So in terms of recovery, but then the thing is, they get 3 or 4 days, and then most of them will come back and do the 5. which is a two rounds and then done. So I don't think that'll make too much difference, and it's going to be tactical. Like, so they'll the first K might be quick. They sort of sort themselves out, and then usually it dips down and it slows up and so on, and that's where. Whether it's Kenya, Ethiopia, or this chapter guy from Uganda, someone's got to shake the tree and say, like, not this time, and then that's their opportunity to beat Farah. But if there are 6 or 7 guys coming up to the bell with 1 lap to go, and Farah's one of them, he's winning the race, because 6 or 7 means it's slow. Someone needs there to be 2 guys at the bell, because then you've obviously made it honest enough, fast enough to hurt people. If there's 6 guys and Farah's one of them, it's done.
Well, a fascinating weekend of athletics ahead of us, the World Championships in London, and I think we're all pretty excited here. We're going to be back tomorrow at around about 9 o'clock, a little bit earlier tomorrow, just to kind of take you through the 10,000 from last night and preview tomorrow night, and of course lots of action over the weekend. From a South African perspective, we've got Caster Semenya running the 1500, and of course Simbine potentially a chance at a medal in the 100 meters. We're excited about that as well. But Ross, thanks so much for your time, and let us know what your thoughts are. Send us some questions. If you have anything that you want to ask us, please send that, and we can maybe answer it tomorrow or in the next week. We're going to be every single day. We're going to be live on Facebook, and we're going to be able to download the podcast on our website. And cheers for now.
Thanks.